Hello and welcome to the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, registered dietitian, running coach, marathon runner, and mom. This season, we're breaking down running's biggest trends, hot topics, and myths, and turning them into practical nutrition and training advice you can actually use every day. Let's get into it. Hey runners, before we get into today's episode, I want to ask you a quick question. Have you ever wondered if your nutrition is actually helping your running, or is it actually holding you back? If you want to find out, I've created a brand new free resource just for you. It's called the Runner's Fueling Audit. It's a super quick checklist that's going to help you spot the signs of underfueling, low energy availability, or where the gaps in your nutrition might be that are impacting your recovery and actually slowing you down. It only takes a few minutes to go through, and by the end, you're going to know whether or not your fueling is on the right track, or if you really need to start making some changes to the way you approach your eating so you can start to feel stronger on every run, reduce your injury risk, and actually get the results that you're training so hard for. You can grab your free copy right now by clicking on the link in the show notes. Again, this is called the Runner's Fueling Audit. It's a free downloadable resource, and it's going to give you so much clarity on how you can start feeling smarter and running stronger. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I, of course, am your host, Stephanie Natchuk, and today we are talking about fats. Now, I find that fats in our diet, from a sport nutrition perspective, can often be sort of like the forgotten nutrient. We focus a lot on carbs and protein, making sure that we're fueling with enough carbs and making sure that we're getting in our protein for recovery and all those wonderful things. And it's sort of like, where does fat fit in here? Like how does fat fit in a runner's diet? Do we need to be thinking about fat? Do we need to be like planning and prioritizing fat in any way? And if you kind of like zoom out to the broader sort of, nutrition space and conversations, it is a really interesting macronutrient because just like carbs and, right now protein kind of having its big like moment in the spotlight, fat has also sort of come and gone out of popularity depending on the diet culture of the time. So if you were around in, the 90s, low fat was like the era, right? Low fat everything, right? We had, low fat, zero fat yogurt and, low fat snacks and like everything was just trying to be made and promoted with like the minimal amount of fat possible. And that then kind of gave way to the high fat diet trend that sort of came about, more so in like the mid 2000s, where then all of a sudden it was this pushback against the idea of low fat eating to say, well, no, actually, like fat has a lot of value in our diet. And, then of course that gets taken way too far into like the keto space. And then it was all of a sudden we should be going out of our way to try and eat as much fat as possible. And then, and so it goes, right? And as well, actually, like maybe that's not the best advice. And we have to scale back a little bit there. And, the pendulum continues to swing dramatically in every direction. But I vividly remember, having these conversations when I was first studying nutrition. This would have been like kind of in the early mid 2000s. So like I graduated high school and started university in 2006. So, oh my gosh, this is my 20th high school anniversary. I graduated high school 20 years ago this year. Oh, okay. Having a moment about that. All right. Anyway, moving on. So, and I remember like getting into university and studying nutrition, and it was sort of like the interesting kind of topic of the time was like, oh, but like, did you know that fat is actually necessary in our diets? And sharing that information or hearing that information was really important for people to get that messaging of like, oh, actually, your diet shouldn't be and doesn't need to be like zero fat or as low fat as humanly possible, right? And it just coming out of the diet culture of that time that like, I don't even know if they still make these, but like the zero fat salad dressings. I don't know if those are still on the shelf or not. They probably are far gone out of popularity by now, but like you could eat very close to zero fat if you were really trying. So it was like, oh, well, no, actually, like fat should be, 20 to 35% of your daily calories can come from fat, right? 20 to 35% feels like a massive amount of your daily calories. interestingly, we actually get more daily calories from fat than we do from protein. Now, the difference, though, is that protein has far fewer calories per gram than fat. So if we look at like gram per gram, we eat more grams of protein per day than we do grams of fat per day, generally speaking. Like if we're talking about the typical nutrition targets that I would say provide to a client of mine, usually someone needs more grams of protein per day than grams of fat per day. However, the calorie density of fat means that they're going to be consuming a higher percentage of fat calories than protein calories on average. Sometimes they're going to be pretty close. Like sometimes they're going to be, maybe each of them will be 25%, for example, but it's not too often that it's going to be feasible for someone to say get in like a 30% protein diet while keeping fat to like closer to 20%. Like that's challenging to do. It can be done, but you're probably going to have to supplement with like some protein powders and things like that in order to make that macronutrients fit, or be relying a lot on plant proteins, which again are very low in fat. So we'll get into all of that today. But yeah, I find that, like carbs and like protein and everything, all of these different nutrients sort of has a time in the spotlight, or a time that it's really, a focal point. And it's fascinating that even just in the time that I've been a dietitian, it's been this big conversation around fat and types of fats and quality of fats and, how much saturated fat and should we be having it or not, et cetera, et cetera. Now all of a sudden, all anybody can talk about is protein. And it just, so goes the cycle. We'll be back to fat again one day, probably before I retire. So as runners, like as endurance athletes, fat sort of gets forgotten and can sometimes get a little bit of a bad reputation because of the fact that as a running fuel, it's not our best friend at higher intensities. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're somebody who does ultra events, if you're doing very long endurance, like multi-day sort of events, if you're doing long trail events, that sort of thing, then this probably won't apply to you. Like you're probably going to use fat as more of an intra-workout fuel source versus someone who's doing a road race, right? And so this is where the intensity, or say the speed of our work, is going to vary in terms of the calories that we're burning. As I mentioned before, fat is also far more calorie dense, so you get more calories in a smaller package. So it can be very efficient and helpful from a logistical perspective to bring fat calories along with you on some of those long ultra types of events versus a road race, right? Where we're talking a couple of hours that you're going to be out there, and carbohydrates for fuel at that intensity is going to be more beneficial. The higher the intensity, the more fat we're consuming, the more likely we are to get GI distress. But again, if the intensity is lower, say for that type of ultra trail event, or just ultra event in general, then we can often tolerate more fat, and we just need to be focusing on taking in more calories in general. If we were just relying on carbohydrates for 10 hours, 12 hours, or maybe even days on end, then we can have a very hard time keeping up with our body's fueling requirements. So again, I'm more so talking about fat from a road racing perspective, like half marathon to marathon distance. Just know that if you're listening to this as an ultra event, an ultra runner, then it will be a little bit different for you. So just kind of take this with a bit of a grain of salt, and don't get mad at me if I'm saying things that don't apply to you. Okay, so fat is absolutely essential in our diet. We would be doing ourselves a tremendous disservice if we did truly try to minimize our fat intake, say below about 20% of our daily calories. Below around 20%, it might be hard for us to be making sure we're meeting our requirement for calories. Like fat is very calorie dense. And so getting in very little fat means that we have to get those calories from somewhere else. That might be challenging to do. The other thing is that fat, of course, there are certain fats in our diet that we eat that are essential fats, meaning we have to get them from food. So when it comes to nutrition, the term essential means that we need to get it externally from a food source or, say, from a supplement. It means that we cannot make that nutrient ourselves. So we have essential fats. Those are going to be like our omega-6 and our omega-3 fats that are essential. We need to get them from food. They are very important for our body's health and optimal functioning. Fat is also a source of nutrients. So these fat containing foods that we consume in our diet are giving us a lot of nutrients, vitamins and minerals, fat soluble nutrients, as well as sometimes these fat sources, like foods that are high in fat, say avocados, nuts and seeds, cheese, etc., cooking oils, they're also very high in other nutrients. So like nuts and seeds, great source of magnesium. They have zinc, other essential vitamins and minerals, again, things that we need to get from food. And then, of course, the fat in our bodies, when we consume it, it's also playing a role in things like hormone production. It's helping us build healthy cells. It's giving us that source of energy. And like in our bodies physically, it's helping us regulate body temperature, adding a level of cushioning for our organs, etc. So fat plays a ton of roles, both in what it does for us and then the nutrients that we get packaged along with it. So we definitely don't want to have a diet that is completely devoid of fat. But of course, there are different types of fats that give us different things, and some are a little bit more health promoting compared to others. So we have unsaturated fats. Unsaturated fats are typically what we think of as our healthy fats. So if you hear people talking about like healthy fats, swapping healthy fats for unhealthy fats, that kind of thing, that's going to be typically your unsaturated fats. Now, there are people in the nutrition space who would disagree with me there. However, those individuals are not giving information that is in alignment with the vast majority of nutrition research out there. So there are people who very heavily promote eating a diet that is higher in saturated fats. So saturated fats are fats that are solid at room temperature. This is like butter, coconut oil, cheese, red meat. A lot of fried foods are high in saturated fat, processed foods, processed meats, things like that. Those are higher in saturated fats. Now, what we know is that too much saturated fat can have negative impacts on our health, whether that's through increasing our LDL cholesterol levels or our bad cholesterol levels. They can contribute to higher levels of inflammation, more inflammation in the body. They're totally fine, though, in small amounts. They also can contribute to weight gain for some people who are genetically susceptible, which is a good chunk of the population. A high saturated fat diet is actually shown to increase weight gain, specifically like around the midsection, so like visceral fat in and around our abdomen. So for most people, keeping saturated fat pretty low is a good idea. Whereas on the other hand, we want the majority of the fats we eat to be coming from unsaturated fats. And the reason that unsaturated fats are better for us is not because they're different in terms of calories, right? All fats have the same calories per gram. So unsaturated fats are not lower in calories or anything like that compared to saturated. But because of the different type of fat they do different things in the body. So they can improve our cardiovascular health, reduce risk factors for cardiovascular disease. They can help to reduce inflammation, support the function of the immune system. Things like omega-3 fats can also help to reduce blood pressure, improve brain health and brain function. And the other big thing is that these foods that supply these unsaturated fats are often very nutrient dense foods as well. So like I mentioned before, we've got things like flax seeds, nuts, walnuts, fatty fish, avocados, olive oil that is rich in polyphenols. So these foods are not just fat, but they have other benefits and provide us with other nutrients. So generally speaking, out of the total fat that we eat per day, which again is going to be somewhere between 20 and 35% of our daily calories, we want the majority of that fat to be unsaturated fat versus saturated. Now, of course, I am not saying that we never eat butter not saying that we never eat cheese, obviously. I would never ever tell you to not eat cheese or like chocolate, right? We're not never having these again. It's just looking at what are the main sources of saturated fat in my diet. Am I maybe going overboard, having portion sizes that are too big, or maybe I'm having them too frequently, too many saturated fat sources throughout the day? Where can I cut back? Where can I swap saturated fat for an unsaturated fat? And then, of course, we have something called trans fats. So in Canada, they have been slowly phased out of the food supply to the point where I do not believe that there are any products that have artificial trans fats in them any longer. There are small amounts of naturally occurring trans fats in some dairy products and in meat. So, and this is just a naturally occurring trans fat that is just there. It's not added. You'll still find trans fats listed on food labels, but it's the added trans fats that were in processed foods. Just in my experience, it was things like microwave popcorn, shelf stable like crackers, those Pillsbury, the like pre-made biscuits, like the pre-made refrigerated doughs that you like cookies and biscuits and things like that. Those typically were very high in trans fats. Those have all been phased out of the food supply. And the reason is because they were worse than saturated fats even. So they were a man-made type of shelf-stable saturated fat. But when they looked at the health outcomes of high trans fat consumption, it was very bad when it came to cardiovascular disease risks. And so they ended up removing them from the food and they're no longer used in our food supply. I cannot speak, though, for all other countries and what the limits are on that. So what I would say is that just, be on the lookout for trans fats on food labels and just avoid things that are going to be giving you quite a bit of those. All right. So when it comes to, looking at that balance of fats in our diet, again, I really want runners to think about including fat sources that are also giving you other benefits, right? So those whole food sources of fats that are providing you with nutrients and providing you with other things that you need. So that's going to be like your omega-3 fats that come from fish, fish oils, chia seeds, hemp hearts, walnuts, and then of course we've got like our avocados, pumpkin seeds or other seeds, other nuts, things like that, that you're getting something in addition to just the fat, right? We don't want to go out of our way, generally speaking, to add extra fat to our diet, right? Because it's not a great fuel source for running. So if we're doing a lot of training, we might need a little bit of fat, a little bit more fat in our diet to meet our calorie goal, but we don't want to be going overboard with adding lots of extra fat, like adding really large amounts of cooking oils or salad dressings or things like that if we don't need to be meeting a certain calorie goal, right? Like if you're a runner who's a very high volume athlete training for hours and hours a day and you're just trying your best to get in, like your 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day that you need, yes, please be liberal with all of the added fats, right? Like no one's stopping you. But for most of us who are training, maybe up to an hour most days of the week, we'll have one long run a week, a rest day a week, maybe 2 rest days a week, right? A little bit of strength training. We don't need to be going out of our way to try and add extra fat calories to our diet, right? We need to be focusing on quality sources of fat that also give us a nutrition boost and still getting the majority of our nutrition from things like protein and carbohydrates, again, nutritious sources that are going to be helping us to fuel better quality workouts. But we don't need to go like overboard and go really crazy with fats. Getting into that 20 to 35% range is going to be perfect. Now, if we're talking about running specifically, this is where things get important to talk about timing, right? Because for people who don't run, when they eat the fat throughout the day doesn't really matter. But for us as runners, this is where we can almost go too low with our fat and sort of eliminate fat unnecessarily, because around the time that we're training, we might need to be very mindful of not going overboard with fat consumption because fat is slow to digest. The value of that is that it keeps us full for longer when we eat it. So if we eat food with fat in it, we are not going to be hungry as soon as if we eat food with no fat. But that lingering and that slowed down digestion is what could contribute to GI distress if we're eating too much fat too close to a run. And this is one of the big mistakes that I see runners making, especially when it comes to things like carb loading, is choosing foods that are too high in fat for their carb load. So carb loading with like ice cream, pizza, French fries, donuts, cookies, like things that honestly a lot of the time can have as many fat calories as they do carbohydrate calories. So we're getting that slowing down of our digestion. We're getting that extra fat in our digestive tract, and it's stopping us from being able to meet our carbohydrate fueling target because we're so full from all the fat, and also can be triggering gut issues. So being very mindful immediately before and during training runs, we probably want to minimize the fat that we're eating. Now, of course, we're not saying zero fat whatsoever, right? Thin spread of peanut butter on a piece of toast or a bagel, probably fine for most people. But if you are having gut issues, kind of look back a little bit and see that there are some fat sources in your pre-workout meal or in what you're fueling with during your run, then that might be something to look at, right? Would we do better if we actually took out the fat? And then, of course, we don't want to overdo fat immediately afterwards either, after a run, because that's when we're really trying to focus on the carbs and the protein for recovery. Now, of course, you're going to have whatever amount of fat is like naturally found in the foods that you're eating, right? Again, we're not aiming to go zero fat or like minimize fat entirely. We just want to not go out of our way to add extra fat to our diet. So we're not trying to make it a high fat meal, right? Whatever amount of fat is naturally in the foods that you're choosing is fine. You're not like trying to skip it or trying to avoid it. And so what that kind of gives us is at the other meals, at other times of day, then we're going to allow ourselves to, again, get in the fat that comes naturally with our food, make sure we are choosing some of those naturally higher fat, but very nutrient dense items, limit our intake of saturated fat and excess added fats, and just really be mindful of like when we're eating around our training so that we aren't maybe triggering GI issues from too much fat at the wrong times of day. So at the end of the day, fat is an essential but sometimes misunderstood nutrient. And I find that the biggest issue with fat is that it's really overlooked when it comes to sport nutrition. We spend very, very little time talking about or even reflecting on fat. In practice, when I'm working with a new runner, I find the biggest thing is making sure that we're not eating too much saturated fat compared to the unsaturated fats. So often, total fat consumption isn't too bad, but that ratio of getting more saturated fat than we really need can be a problem. And this is where kind of like the deeper nutrition quality and like, are we meeting our needs for the vitamins and minerals along with those fat sources can become a little bit of something to navigate, just something to sort of work on. If optimizing body composition, losing a little bit of weight as you kind of go through this running journey or go through this running process, one of the, I think, best things that you can do is really look at the amount and the portion sizes of some of those higher saturated fat foods that you're taking in. And the reason I say that is because there is such a prevalence of those genetic variations that lead to saturated fat contributing to weight gain for a lot of individuals. And, when I do genetic testing with my clients to kind of look at those factors, this is something that comes up pretty frequently and often something that is really actionable just to shift to maybe leaner protein sources, shift portion sizes of some of those high saturated fat foods, and then also make sure that we are getting in enough of the unsaturated fats and shifting maybe some of our cooking practices and that sort of thing. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed this episode today, kind of breaking down fat, what it is, where to find it, what's the value of it, and how much you should really be getting as a runner, as well as when. If you're looking for more help with your nutrition strategy as you get ready for your next race, I would love to help you out. I have tons of different options depending on the level of support you're looking for and depending on where you're stuck and struggling with your running this season. So I have my Fueled Runner program, which is an 8-week program that takes you step by step through learning how to create that personalized fueling plan from base building to race week nutrition, hydration, everything that you need to feel really strong and confident when you line up for your next race. I also have my Fuel Train Recover Club, which is my online program for runners that also includes run coaching and strength training programming. And then, of course, I have my one-to-one coaching options as well. I do take a small number of one-on-one clients each season. So you can find the links for all of those in the show notes. And of course, we'll catch you back here next week. Bye for now. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.